Welcome to ChamberLIVE. Today, an employment law update presented for us by Emma Swan from Forbes. The views expressed in this seminar don't necessarily represent the views of the East Lancs Chamber of Commerce, although we more often than not, we agree with Emma wholeheartedly. And all the facts are believed to be correct at the time of recording, which is the 20th of May, 2020. Now it's time to meet our guest speaker this morning, Emma Swan, who's partner at Forbes and head of commercial employment. She works with a variety of sizes of businesses in contentious and non-contentious matters, working in key sectors including manufacturing, construction and hospitality. She's valued by her clients not only as an employment lawyer, but also as a business advisor who is accessible and attentive too. She's got experience in areas such as providing strategic level advice on employment aspects of restructures, transfers, mergers, acquisitions, advising on TUPE, conducting advocacy in employment tribunal cases, supporting with daily HR issues, particularly strong on discrimination issues, providing practical and strategic training and employment tribunal litigation across the country. She's also a legal 500 recommended lawyer, which means she's eminently qualified to speak to us all this morning. Delighted to be able to introduce Emma Swan from Forbes. Over to you, Emma.
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and see some familiar names as well there. So thank you very much for the introduction there, Simon. Simon has kindly said that he will help share the screen, the slides for me, because I am a bit of a technophobe, hence why there's a little bit of a delay. The key focus that I'm going to have this morning is I'm going to take us through the updates to the coronavirus job retention scheme. I'm just going to call it the furlough scheme because it's less of a mouthful. I'm then going to talk through some of the easing of lockdown restrictions and take you through some stages that I think that you need to be thinking about in terms of bringing people back to the workplace. I'm going to talk about some different groups of employees that you perhaps need to give a bit more special consideration to. That's great, Simon, thank you. And then talk about some of the things that you can think about in terms of changing your workplace. So if we move on to the next slide for furlough, first of all. Many of you will already be familiar with the furlough scheme, and some of you are more likely than not using it or talking to clients who are using it. So I'm not going to go into the detail of what the scheme is for today or how to apply it, because this was covered in the Chamber's first employment law update. But that was a good few weeks ago now. So what I am going to do is to bring you up to date with some of the changes that have happened since that webinar for the furlough scheme, because there have been a significant number of guidance notes that have been brought out since then, as well as the Treasury direction. So if we move on to the next slide. The main one that most of you will have spotted last week is that the furlough scheme has now been extended. It's been extended by another 4 months, which takes us to the end of October. Now, for the next couple of months, there aren't going to be any changes. We are going to see changes being brought in at the end of July, though. So from August to October, the plan is that furloughed workers can start coming back on a part-time basis. And the rate of the grants that employers will be able to claw back is going to be reduced. Now, what many of you will have experienced yourselves with the furlough scheme is there's been a bit of a challenge that for some individuals, you've wanted them to be doing some work, you've needed them to be doing some work, whether that was, raising invoices, processing orders, following up leads, but you've not had enough work for them to be working their normal hours, or you've not had the cash flow to be able to pay them. So everybody in those kind of positions have wanted to take advantage of the furlough scheme. However, you've then had your hands tied because you've not been allowed to let those individuals undertake any work, which then has meant there's either a backlog in your invoices being processed or orders being processed, or you've not had salespeople getting new work in ready for when lockdown starts being eased. So the government has listened to the likes of the Chamber and other organisations representing businesses, and we are going to see a plan for that part-time basis to be rolled out from August. We've not had the details of that yet. We are expecting to see them any time now. They said it would be within this this month. We've barely got a week left of May, but as most of you who are following changes to employment law will know, they generally update guidance in an evening, and invariably it's either on a Friday night or a Monday night. I think they like to spoil the lives of employment lawyers and HR professionals by keeping us on our toes and making it a bit of a panic station to make sure everything's ready for the following morning when the rest of the business wants to know what is happening. So as soon as I see that, I'll be sharing it on LinkedIn, and we'll get it on our coronavirus webpage on Forbes, so please keep an eye on that. The one thing that employers will need to start factoring in for their cash flow is that what the government is seeking to do is starting, instead of reducing the 80% of the furlough to the employee, they're going to start asking the employer to contribute towards that 80%. So what they're discussing at the moment is that the government will perhaps contribute 60%. They'll ask the employer to top the 20% up to the 80%, so the employee isn't losing out, but the government are slowly, and the phrase that's being used is weaning us off the furlough. So if you are looking at cash flow and planning the budgets over the next few months, just bear in mind that if you've got furloughed staff, even if you're going to want to keep them on furlough, you're likely to you're going to need to start contributing to that furlough. But the benefit of that is that you will then be able to start asking people to do some work again for you. Okay, so if we move on to the next screen, please. The next change that we have seen over the last few weeks is some clarification from the government around annual leave and holiday pay whilst on furlough. And it was actually last week that the guidance came out on this. So if you've not had a read of that, take a look at the guidance for furlough and holiday pay. I shared it on LinkedIn last week, so you'll be able to find it fairly easily through my post as well. The main thing that it has clarified, and certainly us at Forbes have been advising that this was the position anyway, was that employees can still take holiday whilst they are on furlough. There weren't any changes to the working time regulations when the government brought in the furlough scheme, but there was a bit of uncertainty from some areas, and they have now clarified it. The other important thing to note is that employers can actually require their employees to take holiday whilst they are on furlough leave. Again, initially, there was some speculation as to could you make people take holiday when they were on furlough and they weren't working anyway. The answer now is very firmly that yes, you can ask them. The important thing to note is that if you are requiring employees to take holiday whilst they're on furlough, though, is that they are still entitled to their normal holiday pay. So if you are only paying them the 80% from the furlough scheme, you will need to top that up to the 100% of their normal pay. Okay. The other thing to bear in mind, and there again, this hasn't changed from the working time regulations, but it's a good time to remind you that if you are requiring employees to take holiday, then the notice periods you need to give are double the length of holiday if you're asking them to take holiday on particular days. And equally, if you want to cancel employees' holidays, you are entitled to do that. And if you are doing that, then you need to give the length of the planned holiday in notice to cancel that for them. Okay. The other thing to bear in mind, and again, this is set out in the guidance, is in relation to furloughed workers and bank holidays. So if a bank holiday is going to be falling within a period of furlough leave, and the worker would usually have worked that bank holiday, their furlough is going to be unaffected by that bank holiday. However, if the worker would usually have had the bank holiday as annual leave, you've got two options that you can agree with those employees. First of all, you can agree that they will still take the bank holiday as annual leave, and you'll need to then make sure that you top them up to 100% for that 1 day's bank holiday. Or you can agree with the employee that they defer that 1 day of bank holiday. So for example, next Monday, if you would normally have someone who's entitled to bank holidays as a day's holiday, you can either agree that they still take it, top them up to 100%, or if you are struggling with cash flow and you think, no, we want them to remain on furlough, you carry on paying them as normal for furlough, but you let them take that 1 day's bank holiday later on in the year. Okay, so if we then move on to the next slide, please. Some of you may recall from the outset of the furlough scheme that initially this was going to be limited just to those employees who were unable to work from home and would otherwise have been laid off or made redundant because of coronavirus and ultimately the lockdown. That wording has now been taken out of the guidance and it has been changed. And it now says that if you can't maintain your current workforce because your operations have been severely affected by coronavirus, you can apply for furlough. So that is much, much broader. So most of you will remember that initially furlough was brought in because the knee-jerk reaction for a number of businesses, and indeed some of the advice that we were giving at the outset before furlough was even dreamt up as a concept and a right, was that to preserve businesses, employees were going to have to be laid off or made redundant because that was the only legal avenue that was going to be available to some businesses who simply didn't have the cash flow to keep going, or they simply weren't able to run the business because of the lockdown. The furlough scheme was brought in to protect those people. However, the government have realised that there have been wider implications to businesses. So it isn't just people who are going to be made laid off or made redundant. It's people who are trying to shield members of their family. It's working parents who have children who are homeschooling. There's a variety of reasons. So it's good news that they have broadened that, and that gives you, if you haven't already reconsidered who you've got on furlough, it gives you a new opportunity to think, right, is there anybody else in the business who we could look at furloughing through June? And this may help their personal circumstances. It may be that for some individuals you'd agreed for them to take unpaid leave, for example, for parents who are homeschooling. This might give you an opportunity to touch base with them, offer them to go on furlough, so at least they're getting some pay whilst they are at home homeschooling, and then hopefully from August you'll be able to start bringing them back in on a part-time basis without affecting your right to claim some of the furlough back. The furlough scheme, therefore, has been extended quite considerably, so you can now furlough shielding employees. You can furlough employees who you have already got on long-term sickness absence. You can extend fixed-term contracts that you might have in place that are due to expire. You can extend them and then put those employees on furlough. And there are some categories of workers who you can furlough as well. So have a look at the guidance that has been updated, or give me a shout if you have not employees, but you have workers who you think might be entitled to be furloughed as well. Now, one of the things that it's also important to remind you of through the furlough is that HMRC are going to be auditing this. At the moment, they're not carrying out any spot checks, but you may have seen that they have opened up a call helpline, so that if employees are concerned that employers are either fraudulently claiming on furlough or currently are asking or demanding that employees work even though they're furloughed, you are able to tip the HMRC off. So they've already started that, so be aware of that. The second thing is that they are going to be coming back and auditing this. And last week they issued a document entitled Claim for Wages Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. And in that, they have confirmed that you need to keep a copy of all your furlough records for 6 years. Now, previously that was 5 years, so make a note that you keep it for that extra 12 months. You will need to keep a record of the amount you have claimed and the claim period for each employee you furlough. You will need to keep a record of the claim reference number, and you also should keep a record of your calculations in case HMRC need more information about your claim. Now, we are actually offering an auditing service for furlough. So if you've got any questions or you want someone to come in and have a look at what you are retaining, or we can do it remotely, of course, now, then please give us a shout, because the auditing is something that is going to be looked at very closely, we think, in the next 12 months, once it's been phased out. So if we then move on to the easing of lockdown restrictions, some of you will already have started planning for this following Boris's announcement the previous week, when he started saying that he would like to encourage certain sectors to be going back into work, for us starting to be plan to return to the workplace. Some of you who are in manufacturing and construction may already have had to undertake these, but I thought that it might be worthwhile just taking you through 4 steps that I think are quite important in this planning process. So step 1 is to think about, can your employees work from home? You need to consider this quite carefully. It is still the government's preference, and it is going to be their preference for a considerable period of time, possibly until they find a vaccine. If it's not possible, the government is encouraging you to bring them back to work, but only if you can do that safely, which takes us on to step 2. So if they can't work from home, can you set up a safe system of work? Now, to do that, you have to do all you reasonably can to set up that safe system of work. You've also then got to ensure that it is implemented and keep the system under review. Now, the government has issued a number of guidance papers on this. There are 8 specific guidance papers that relate to different types of sector. But what you need to remember is this is just guidance at this stage. It isn't the law. So you also need to make sure that you are following the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Now, if you breach the statutory duties, that's a criminal offence. So that is the key piece of legislation you need to be following. The guidance is something that should be giving you examples and ideas of what you ought to be doing. Now, the guidance places particular emphasis on your risk assessments, and they're encouraging you to do that with your union, or if you don't recognise a union, with employees. So if you've got a works committee or employee representatives, go to them and try and encourage them to get involved with this. If you don't, then you may want to think about electing representatives solely for ensuring that there is a safe return to work. They are also recommending that you put that risk assessment on your website, and you display the government notice that you can get from the government's website in your workplace to show that you're following the guidance. Now, this ought to then help you with some of those employees that you are likely to experience being reluctant to come back to the workplace, because you will be able to demonstrate by pointing to the website, by pointing to the government's notice, that you are doing everything you possibly can to make sure that it is safe. Step 3 is consider any mitigating actions. So if, when you look at your working practices, you think that you're not going to be able to follow the 2-metre social distancing measures, for example, you're going to need to consider very carefully whether you can continue to operate the business, and if you do, what are you going to do to make it safe? So it's things like, do you need to put up protective screens or barriers? Do you need to provide PPE, such as gloves or masks, face coverings? Do you actively encourage people to be hand washing and cleaning the surfaces? Now, I know it sounds silly to say it, that you perhaps need team leaders encouraging people to take a break and wash their hands or clean surfaces. But in some businesses, I'm afraid some employees will need that level of instruction. So bear that in mind as well when you're planning for going back, whether you have any system where you can then have team leaders reminding people to take that 5-10 minutes to go and clean up, scrub up, clean their areas, particularly if they move around an area of work. And step 4 is whether you consider not allowing work to take place at all, because if you can't let people come back in and keep them socially distant, if you can't put in mitigating factors such as PPE to ensure that someone is safe, then really you shouldn't be obliging anybody to work when they have not got a safe work environment to work in. So you're going to have to plot that through. Can they work from home, stage 1? If not, can you set up that safe system of work? If not, what can you do to try and make it safer? And if you simply cannot make it safe, then do not oblige people to return to work. Now, if we move on to the different groups of people, I'm going to take you through the main groups of people that there are special things to think about. And it isn't just about making sure that you are complying with health and safety, it's also making sure that you remember the Equality Act as well, and the fact that some people will have disabilities, so they have that next level of protection almost, of us being obliged to make reasonable adjustments for them. So the first group of people are probably the most extreme group. They are the clinically extremely vulnerable group, and I'll refer to them as CEV. And they are the people who have been advised to shield, who've got those letters telling them that they need to shield. And they are highly likely to be classed as disabled people under the Equality Act. For those individuals, they are being strongly advised to stay at home. So when you are planning a return to the workplace, you may already have them on furlough leave, or they may already be on sick leave. Have a think about whether you can reallocate some of the tasks or provide equipment to them to actually be working at home, because there are likely to be some duties that you can move around to facilitate them being able to work from home. In some situations, you won't be able to, and that's where you will either continue to have them on furlough or on sick leave. The second group of people are the clinically vulnerable, CV. They haven't been advised to shield, but they are likely to be disabled under the Equality Act. They are likely to be people who are included in the age category of 70 or more. They're likely to be your pregnant employees or those with some underlying health conditions. Now, those individuals haven't been told to stay at home and shield, but they are being advised to stay at home. So again, similarly to the CEV individuals, have a look at what tasks, if any, you can reallocate to those people. If not, then you have to look at whether you can safely bring them back into the workplace through your risk assessments, through social distancing. If for those individuals you don't think that you can provide them with the level of protection that they need, then you can consider continuing with furlough. And some other alternatives are looking at agreeing unpaid leave with them. You can agree that they take some holidays, or you can require them to take some holidays. If they're on maternity or due to start maternity, you can look at maternity suspension on full pay for those pregnant ladies. The third group of people to be thinking about are some of your other disabled people. So those that don't fall under the first two categories, but are still especially vulnerable. It may be someone, for example, who's got a history of chest infection problems. They may be disabled under the Equality Act. So what you need to then be thinking about is what reasonable adjustments you can be offering to them if they are being required to come back into the workplace. And for those reasonable adjustments, we would strongly recommend that you consult with the GP or take advice from occupational health. Now, occupational health are still operating, they're doing it virtually, just like the rest of us are. So it's really important for that group of people you really ascertain what you can do to protect them. The next group of people are those who are living with people who are either clinically extremely vulnerable, who have to shield, or those who are clinically vulnerable and have been advised to. You may have a member of staff who themselves is fit and well, but they are worried about bringing back coronavirus to people in their home who are shielding. Now, if, again, you comply with social distancing measures at work for those individuals, you should be encouraging them to come back. Alternatively, if you don't think that you can safely do that, look at reallocating them work at home. And if you can't do that, again, you can consider extending their furlough, looking at agreeing unpaid leave with them, or asking or requiring them to take holiday. The next group are those who have had coronavirus. What you need to think about with these individuals are, do you have any employees who've had coronavirus and actually been hospitalised, and in particular those who have been in ICU? Given what we know about those individuals who are surviving coronavirus, who have been hospitalised, there is very likely that they are going to have long-term effects on their health, whether that is physical problems with their breathing or whether they have mental health issues. Some may experience anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder going forwards, and it's really important we take that into account for those groups of people as well. A little bit like those who are especially vulnerable in that third group, you might want to consider liaising with their GP or getting specific occupational health advice as to what you can do to make reasonable adjustments to help them come back. If you can't let them work from home, then you can see what safety measures you can put in place to bring them back. Again, if you can't get them working from home, if you can't safely bring them back into the workplace, look at continuing furlough, agreeing unpaid leave, or looking at holiday. And finally, in terms of some of those special groups, are those with childcare responsibilities. We are hoping that some children will be able to start going back from the 1st of June, but not all children will be. Some children, parents have got the right to say, no, we don't want them going back. So children who perhaps live in a house where parents or one or more people are shielding because of health conditions. So what we need to think about is the parents, the working parents, who can't come back into the workplace because they still have children at home. Now, with those individuals, again, you can look at extending that furlough if they can't be working at home. Another alternative for them is to allow them to take parental leave, which is unpaid leave. They can use holidays, or you can require them to. But one thing to make a note of is that unless their child is actually poorly, they are not entitled to take the emergency dependence leave. That's only available if children are actually poorly. Okay. And if we move on then to the final slide before we start taking some questions, is just I've just got some examples of adjustments that we have started talking to clients about. Some I've pinched from clients, some of the ideas that they have had. And some of you may have, I think a few of you joined me for a seminar I did the other week on returning to work. So just a few things for you to think about. So first of all, staff who are working from home, what you need to be thinking about is where you're restricting the workers to critical roles for the business, for your operational continuity, for your safe management. Can you have people working from home? Now, if you are, do you need to provide them with any necessary equipment? Now, at the moment, there has been some speculation as to whether the government will introduce a right to work from home. And there's been speculation that if that right is brought in, will employers be obliged to pay for equipment? Certainly, I know some businesses are asking employees to use their own laptops at the moment because they simply haven't got the resources or finances to provide everybody with a laptop. So first of all, my observation on introducing a right to work from home, I don't think that we will have anything brought in that gives employees an automatic right to work from home. What I think we will see is probably an extension to the right to flexible working. So that is a right to request to work flexibly, which would then be extended to say the right to request to work from home in a flexible way. Okay, which again, I think businesses will then be able to look at closely as to whether they have a business reason why they either agree to that or they don't. I really would be very surprised if the government, particularly a Tory government, extends the right to work to home to then an expectation that employers will have to pay for the equipment as well, because a lot of businesses simply won't be able to afford it at the moment, or indeed for the foreseeable future. But you do need to be thinking, if you're asking people to work from home, can they actually effectively do that for you? If you are asking people to use their own IT equipment or mobiles, have you made sure that they can comply with your data protection policies and work securely from their own devices? One of the things that we have seen some businesses doing is really looking very closely at how they allocate tasks to people so that they can make sure that people who are shielding or who have been advised to remain at home, those two first categories of employees I talked about, can actually stay at home but actually be undertaking work for the business and being paid properly for doing so. So it has meant that there's been quite a bit of flexibility within teams, people picking up duties or passing on duties that other people wouldn't ordinarily do, swapping things. But look carefully at the skills you've got in your workforce and in different teams. Can they swap things around for the short term to enable people to work from home who can't get into the workplace and other people get into work? Another thing that it's really important to do is to be making sure that you are looking after the well-being of your people, whether they're working from home or whether they're returning to work. We are really strongly recommending that there are regular team meetings, whether you do that by calls or virtual meetings, that you are still holding your one-to-ones with managers, because this is where you're going to be able to first identify if people have any concerns about coming back to work, or you're going to be able to start reassuring them. And it's really going to be helpful to then also help you identify which group of workers you are dealing with. Are they people who are reluctant to come back because they're protecting someone else? Are they reluctant to come back because they have still got childcare responsibilities at home? It'll help you really understand that. And also, there are going to be people who've been affected by this in a very different way to what you might expect. Some people will be very worried about coronavirus. Some may be a little bit more ambivalent about it. Some will have lost loved ones, family, friends, and they may be going through a grieving process. Others themselves may have been very poorly, and whilst they haven't been hospitalised, they may still be struggling to get back to their normal fit and healthy selves. So it's really important that we're engaging with people regularly, even those that are on furlough, to make sure that they are okay. A few ideas in terms of when people are back in the workplace are looking at staggering your arrival and departure times, staggering your break times. Can you provide additional parking so that people aren't parking too closely together? If you have employees who live relatively closely, who are going to be able to come on bikes because ordinarily they would rely on public transport, can you provide them with somewhere safe to store their bike, whereas normally you wouldn't have anything? If you use work minibuses, again, you're going to have to look at how you keep people distant on there. You're going to also have to think about your flow of people coming in and out of the business. Can you make sure that you have a one-way flow of people travelling through the workplace? Can you assign one door for an entrance and one for an exit? Can you restrict the areas to some areas of the business? Can you close the kitchen and ask people to bring in their own lunches? Do you need to have a stationary area operating where people can just come in and out, or can you make sure that people are provided on their desk with what they need? Do you operate lifts in your business, and are you going to have to think about how many people you're allowing into a lift at the same time? You're also going to be having to think about, how do you ordinarily operate with visitors? Is that something that you are going to try and resume as quickly as possible? Or are you going to actively discourage that? Are you going to try and continue to have virtual meetings with people? Or are you going to be operating as almost business back to normal where you can? In terms of the visitors, it may be people like delivery people. Are you going to allow access to your bathroom facilities? And if so, how are you going to let them come in and mix with employees? Are you going to provide them with somewhere separate so that they can come in and they can clean themselves down, they can use the facilities before they go on and do something else? It's also going to be important to think about your workplace. Do you need to now have a good clean down of everything before you allow people back in? We're working with a number of businesses in the area who go in and do deep cleans, and they are doing a lot more now. If you need any help to get in touch with them, give me a shout. It may also be that you need to look at increasing the frequency of your cleaners or your waste disposal. So you need to think about how often you've got people in, coming and clearing down. If you operate hot desking, at the moment, although we've not been told not to hot desk, the guidance is very much try and avoid using hot desking if you can do. Now, you might be able to avoid that if you can operate a bit of a shift system of people coming into the office one day and not the next, and assigning set desks. So you're spreading people out and people are getting allocated desks for this temporary period. You need to be thinking about where people are touching things. Are people still using printers? How are you going to clean those down between people using them? Do you use whiteboards? Who is going to be responsible for using them, wiping them down if you still need to use with them? And in terms of managing your workforce, it's really important to think now about how you are going to operate with the people coming in. Are you going to have everybody in? Can you do that safely? And if you can, could you look at adjusting that slightly so you're operating more in shift rotations so that people aren't coming into direct contact with as many people at one time? It's really important as well that we continue to minimise essential travel. So, for example, here at Forbes at the moment, we'll be discouraging client visits at the moment because we're trying to reduce that travel unnecessarily. We're trying to do it as virtually as possible for now. But the key thing that I want to emphasise before I take questions, and many of you will already have experienced this through the lockdown, and certainly those of you who've known me for a long time know that I bang on about this all the time, is that communication is absolutely critical to this. If you are communicating with your staff properly and you are reassuring them about what you are doing, how you are supporting them, and you are telling them how you are following the government guidance, you will have much more effective buy-in from them to get them back to the workplace or to make sure that they are still working effectively from home. One of the challenges that I'm seeing at the moment is that initially, everyone worked from home. They were really positive about it. It was a new experience. It was really exciting. 2 months in, and people are starting to flag a little bit. They might have been really busy at the beginning, and they're back to kind of normal now, but it's much more difficult to motivate yourself when you're looking at the same four walls, you're trying to juggle possibly working from home with children, or with another half and sharing space with them, and people are starting to feel a little bit lower now, particularly as we're not getting the social interaction from our families and friends the same. So keep that communication going and make sure that you are clearly explaining what you're doing and getting people to feedback, because they might have other ideas that you've not thought about. It may be that when people come back to the workplace, you can continue to encourage people to share ideas, because there will be things that it's only when people are back in work that you will start realising you haven't thought about something, or someone will suggest an alternative. So be open-minded to other ideas from other people. Okay, well, I think that we have got about 10 minutes left for questions. I can see that there have been some coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So I'll just introduce the different questions in the order that they came in, if that's all right with you, and then I'll ask you to unmute your microphone and put your question directly to Emma. I'm going to steal another 5 minutes, if that's all right, Emma, and go to 11:35, because we started 5 minutes late, so that'll be bang on an hour. So we've got 15 minutes for questions. Anne-Marie, you were first in, so do you want to unmute your microphone and put your question to Emma?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Anne-Marie.
Hi, thanks for this. It was really good, thank you. We're obviously looking to restructure because everything's just changed. Can we internally advertise new roles during furlough, and for them to come into interviews? Would that be classed as working?
Right, so, yeah, you can start restructuring whilst people are on furlough, and if you're advertising new roles, it's almost effectively you're offering your alternative roles to redundancy. So you can bring people in for interviewing. I don't think that would be classed as working. I think part of the process. Certainly we've had confirmation that employee representatives, for example, and trade union representatives, if they're on furlough, they can still engage in their sorry, my screen's gone funny, it's thrown me a bit. They can engage in their responsibilities as representatives for consultation. So I think you'll be okay having those individuals back for interviewing. One thing I would just query is whether you actually need them physically in, or whether you can have that meeting with them virtually. And that's a meeting, whether it is for an interview for a new role under the restructure, or whether it's more your traditional redundancy consultation. Try and have those meetings virtually if you possibly can.
Brilliant, thank you. I have another question later on. Do you want me to ask it now, Simon, or wait?
Yeah, go for it now, Anne-Marie. Let's get you done and dusted.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a pregnant lady who's going stir crazy at home, so she is really averse to continue to work from home. Can I bring her back part-time because she's asked for it?
If you have undertaken a risk assessment and you are satisfied that you can ensure that there is social distancing in place for her, and that you have got any protective measures in place for her coming into limited contact, having a clean workplace space, then if she's agreeable to that, then yes, she can come back to the workplace.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. It's really helpful.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for your questions.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Justine Jones.
Hello.
Hi, Justine.
Hi. Just one of my questions, obviously we're in a factory environment. We've had more or less all our employees off with furlough, all 60 odd of them. We have got quite a lot back in, but obviously we have a number of them who we've had to keep off on furlough because of childcare issues, shielding, whatever other reasons. And they're obviously accruing holiday pay as they go, and it could be months and months before we see these employees. Can we actually make them take holidays? Obviously, a couple of months can ride with it, but 3, 4, 5 months down the line, it's going to be an awful big ask for them then to come back and say, right, we want so many weeks off holiday now. Yeah. I just want the rules on that, please.
Yes, you absolutely can require employees to take it, because otherwise they're going to be acquiring, they're going to be building up 8 months of holiday pay, which is a massive amount if you then have them coming back from furlough and asking to take holiday straight away. So yes, you can. The same rules apply as they did before though, under the working time regulations, and you can require them to take it. what you need to think about is you need to give them double the length of the holiday as notice. So if you want someone...
Even though we're only doing like a handful of employees, that's absolutely fine, is it?
Absolutely it is, yes. And last week, the government published something specifically on this that you might want to look at. So the guidance is called Holiday Entitlement and Pay During Coronavirus.
I think I did pick up something because obviously with the bank holidays, we had a bit of a tweak of what we paid people for those, really.
Yes, yeah. The one thing to bear in mind is if you're requiring them to take holiday when they're on furlough, is that you're going to need to top up their pay to 100% for those days of holiday.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Was there anything else?
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Justine. Julia Buchanan. Thanks, Justine. Julia Buchanan.
Hi, morning. Thank you for talk this morning. We have an employee who gave us his notice back in February because he was going to go to Canada to work, and obviously because of the flights, they were cancelled. So obviously he didn't. He was due to leave on the 9th of April. So we obviously put him on furlough with the rest of the staff. But we've actually brought all our staff back in now. How long can we keep this ex-member of staff on furlough?
You can keep him on furlough as long as the furlough scheme is in place, unless you agree differently with him. So you could talk to him about whether he does now want to come back into the workplace, if you want to offer him continued work. If you don't and he wants to stand by his resignation, then you can just keep him on the furlough scheme for as long as you want him to remain on it and as long as it's available. So if you wanted to end it, you are within your rights to say, we no longer need you on furlough because we're bringing all the workplace. Your notice has actually expired. So from this date, you will no longer be an employee. Just make sure that if there are any other rights that have accrued or you'd agreed any other benefits during the period that you've extended, that you honour those. But
and obviously just get him to take his holidays that we would have paid him normally after he left whilst he's on furlough.
Yes, you can either require him to take the holidays or you can pay him. It's what works better for the business, because if you've got him on furlough, what you might want to do is require him to take the holiday so that you're claiming 80% of his holiday pay back through the furlough scheme and you're only topping up the 20. Whereas if you end him on furlough and pay him in lieu, you're paying 100% of his holiday.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Peter Hammond has a question on an employee who's retiring. Peter.
Yeah, hi, Emma. It's just a quickie, hopefully. I've got a guy who's retiring officially on the 12th of June. It's all documented. We owe him 19 days holiday. Is it reasonable to furlough him for 19 days and claim 80% back off the government scheme?
Right, well, at the moment, you have to furlough for a minimum of 3 weeks, so that's 21 days. So you'll need to get fair cracking, but you are in your rights to ask him to go on furlough and claim that 80%. You need to get his agreement to it, but what you might want to do is, if he's uncomfortable dropping from 100% to 80%, is you can furlough him for the 3 weeks or up till when he is taking retirement, claim back the 80%, but agree that with him that you will still top up so he's still getting his 100% of his pay, and he might be very happy to take that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Claire Buckle.
Hi.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. I am furloughed from a part-time job on a 100% pay. No, initially until the end of actually May. I suspect they are going to extend it until the end of October, but I am worried they are going to, or can they reduce my pay actually when they have to contribute more?
Well, under the furlough, they only need to be offering you the 80%, but if they have agreed to continue paying you 100%, they would need your agreement to then reduce it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that they need your specific permission to do that. So if they have got specific reasons for agreeing to give you 100%, whereas maybe some other people aren't, then unless those reasons have changed, then they'd be in a difficult position to suggest that you need to change it now and get your agreement to it. Now, what you might find, and I don't want to be alarmist, is that some employers may use this as an opportunity to get people to agree a reduction and say that the alternative is possibly redundancies.
I have already had that.
Right.
Yeah.
But they have to go through a proper redundancy procedure. So if you are someone who either has 2 years service with the business, or you have a protected characteristic whereby you wouldn't necessarily need to have 2 years service if there is an element of discrimination in redundancy selection, your rights against unfair dismissal are still there. So they would still have to be going through a proper process. And I think it would be hard for an employer to show that they've acted reasonably in trying to make you redundant, as opposed to continuing to pay you as they have been, because they have been okay doing that so far.
Okay.
It will very much depend on the specific circumstances of why they need to increase, decrease what they're doing, and how you feel about that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and good luck. Catherine Dobson, it was partly a question and I think partly a bit of a plug for your services, but as a future ChamberLIVE speaker, you're quite welcome.
Thanks so much, Simon. The point I wanted to make first, two things. One, Emma had a really very good, very helpful presentation, lots of stuff. The reference to occupational health. Lot of companies may not have occupational health services. So first question might be, how do they access occupational health services when they actually don't have a provider? And the second point is that sometimes a lot of the issues with people returning to work aren't strictly about occupational health. They're at a more level of general well-being. And it's just some thoughts that people might want to consider, that actually a lot of this is about communication with between the employer and employee, and depending who is doing that, because it's quite possible that the people who usually do that kind of communication are themselves furloughed. So there's a degree of kind of bit of a logjam maybe in who is actually doing that kind of work at the moment. However, the really critical thing is that if you have that communication with employees, you can take an interest in people and ask people what would help you at this point in time and what would help you for considering return to work. Because the conversations now are actually really going to be important to build it for the future and make it easier for people to come back. So it's really, so my thoughts here are really how to enable businesses to think about the right kind of communications with employees.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, first of all, on your question about occupational health, yeah, it's very likely that other than very large businesses who will probably have in-house occupational health or a preferred provider, that many won't. There are a number of occupational health services across the Northwest that businesses can access directly. We work with a number of Forbes who would be happy to recommend if anybody does need occupational health referrals, and they generally operate on a fixed fee basis, so you pay for that appointment and the report that they produce, and in that report they will give you the recommendations, or they ought to give you the recommendations. And then just on the point of communication that you raised, you're quite right, there are many businesses that have furloughed the people who would be the team leaders. We've seen businesses who furloughed HR teams, and they're the people who actually really need to be involved in this and have good ideas. But some of the alternatives that we've seen is that we've seen some businesses who still have people in marketing in because they want to still be driving sales, etc. They've used the marketing team to, instead of doing external marketing, almost done internal marketing to their own staff, and that's worked really well for communications. It's actually brought in a different approach to it than perhaps HR, because they're almost using their selling skills to engage the workforce again, and that's worked really well. But the critical thing really is that your senior leadership team, your directors, understand the importance of the communication, and that they either deliver it themselves. For example, our CEO has been sending out communications on a weekly basis to all of our staff, whether they're furloughed or not, to really pass on that message that we need to keep the communication going. Or they make sure that they bring people back in who are going to be able to manage that communication process. So you might see that people are brought back from furlough in a staged approach to enable that communication with the workforce, and that's been working well with some businesses as well.
Thank you.
Oh, Simon, I think you might be on mute still.
I am. I'm an amateur at this, aren't I? Thank you, Catherine. Justine, you had a second question, which I think was just a point of Emma, you mentioned the notice to put up in the workplace. Where do people find that?
If you Google it for the Government UK, it's on one of the links for the bringing people back to work. So how I did it, I just Googled government guidance, return to workplace, and there's a link there for the thing that you can just print off.
Great. I'll put a link to it in the follow-up email as well. If I may, just indulge me, one final question. Your emphasis on stage one about work from home if you can, that's the most emphasis I've heard someone put on it. Do you envisage that changing as we come down the DEFCON scale? Maybe in June that advice might change slightly, or maybe in July that might change slightly.
To be honest, I don't think it's going to change till the autumn. I think that the government are really going to encourage businesses that have workforces that can work effectively from home to carry on doing so. I think that it's highly unlikely that we will see schools going back, or the large majority of pupils going back till the autumn. And I think that they will want to stagger the return to try and build into that as well. So unless they miraculously suddenly discover a vaccine between now and autumn, or the antibody test, they can get that out, and there is some scientific evidence to say that if you have had coronavirus, you are not going to catch it, or you're very, very unlikely to catch it again. I don't think the government are going to change that guidance. They're going to get people in the workplace where they can't work from home, but otherwise I think they're going to really be pushing for people to continue to work from home, because that will enable them to more safely operate public transport. It will mean less people are on the roads, which may cause accidents. It will also enable parents to be at home for children who are possibly not back at school. So yeah, I really think that that's going to be the emphasis of the guidance for quite a considerable time. I mean, I've spoken to a number of other professionals who aren't in law, but who are mainly operating in offices, and they don't envisage returning to the workplace as a norm until 2021.
Let's invest in a new chair then. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for all your questions, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Emma. That was clear, concise, and extremely well delivered. So we'll have you back, definitely. It was really good.
Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause from the wall, please, for Emma? Just a reminder, tomorrow we have ChamberLIVE Lunge and Learn. That's my son who's clapping in the background. Thank you, Adam. 8:30 tomorrow morning, ChamberLIVE Lunge and Learn, and you can see all our future ChamberLIVE events at chamberlive.co.uk. I'll circulate Emma's details, if that's all right, Emma.
Yes, of course.
On the follow-up email, and the slides, and the link to that poster that we talked about in the follow-up email that'll come around this afternoon. Stay alert, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Bye, Simon. Bye, Emma.